As said earlier, we are going to be talking about summary writing. And today will be our introduction to summary writing. You need to understand what it means and what it involves and how you can get access to answering questions that are very good so that you get your good marks. Before we move on, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm sure you will relate and you'll be able to, as it were, answer these questions yourself. The first question I want to ask you, based on the statement above, is that it is said that teachers at times tend to believe that summary writing is easy and students should be able to do it without being taught. You should know by the end of this lesson. So you can see on our board here, on our slide, our lesson outcomes are the following. The first one is that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what a summary passage is made up of. Number two, you should be able to also demonstrate what the examiner expects you to do about the summary passage. And the third one is, when you see a passage, you should be able to identify topic sentences and write out paragraphs using only essential points. Very good. So these are our learning objectives, and we are going to go straight to the lesson to look at what a summary passage is. To begin, let me ask a question. Everybody knows that when you have a passage, it is made up of a lot of materials. What we have on the board here is that every passage is made up of the following, as we have on the board. Every summary passage that you see that you have been asked to answer is made up of the following. The first one is that it is made up of key points. Number two, it is made up of extraneous or irrelevant or illustrative materials. And thirdly, it is made up of wordiness or verbosity. Let's move on and try to identify what we mean by the following. What do you need to take out? Once you have been able to identify that a summary passage is made up of key points, irrelevant materials, and wordiness, the question is, what do you need to take out? You need to understand that you must take out the wordiness, because that is not part of your answer. You must also take out what we call the extraneous or illustrative materials. And here, you need to understand that we only need the main idea. That is, the examiner considers only the key idea, but regards others as trash. Okay? So let's move on and try to identify what the examiner expects you to do. Once you have been able to identify the words that are illustrative, the examiner expects you to do the following. One, he expects you, the student or the candidate, to understand the passage or text provided. Your understanding of the passage is very key to a successful answer that you are going to write for the examiner. Number two, you must be able to distinguish between the key ideas and the illustrative information. Right? Let's move on so that you get to understand what we mean by wordiness or any other information which is not relevant to what you need as your answer. When we say information is illustrative, this is what characterizes an illustrative information. Number one, Any information you find in the passage, which is in parentheses, and here when we say parentheses, we mean example, he finally answered after taking 5 minutes to think. Now, what you see in the bracket, so you must be aware that when you are reading a summary passage, when you see those kind of information, you must do away with them. And lastly, examples. So when you are reading a passage, a summary passage, and in the passage there are examples, you must do away with them because they are what constitutes what we call illustrative information or wordiness. Let's move on so that we can get to understand more about our summary writing. Now, once you have been able to identify the main idea from the wordiness or the illustrative materials, what do you do next? You are supposed to, as it were, do the following. So that here it says what to do about the main point after distinguishing it from the irrelevant materials. Number one, we are supposed to rewrite the main idea concisely and briefly. You must use fewer words as possible. And number three, you must state the important idea in a simple sentence form. But you must note that a simple sentence carries only one main idea, and therefore it's supposed to have a subject and a predicate. For that matter, you can also write the answer in the form of a preamble, and we are going to see all these things once we move ahead. So let's move on and get to know what we need to know next. Now, how should the answer look like? Your answer to a summary question, how should it look like? The answer should always be written in a simple sentence form or any grammatically acceptable form as demanded by the question. So, as we said earlier on, your answer should look like that, should be in a simple sentence form. Let's move on, please. We are going to look at a sample, an example of how your answer should look like. Now, what you see here is an extract which came in the English language paper 2003. That was written in July. It says, and I'm reading, please follow exactly so that we'll be able to understand the main point and how to get the point, the correct answers out of this extract. It says, armed robbery, one of the social evils in many developing countries, was relatively uncommon in a pre-independent era. Again, I repeat, armed robbery, one of the social evils in many developing countries, was relatively uncommon in the pre-independent era. Now, let's try to answer the following questions. Number one, what is the main idea in the paragraph? Number two, what are the extraneous materials in the extract? In other words, what are the materials which are not needed? And number three, why is it extraneous? Why is it extraneous? So you should be able to answer the question yourself and then understand that whatever is in there will become your materials which are not needed. But before we come to the end of this lesson, we need to go to our plenary because this is the first session of our summary writing, and I'm going to be coming your way with other forms of lesson like this, which is a continuation of whatever we are doing today. So in our plenary, I want to ask you the following questions. And please try to write them down because it will help you in trying to understand the lesson. What did you learn today? Is there anything you found challenging? I'm sure that you have learned a lot of things which are great and fun, and you've got to understand at least what summary writing is all about. I hope that I will be able to meet you next time for us to have a very good session. Thank you for your time. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson. Goodbye and see you next time.